Although I no longer offer one-on-one therapy, from time to time people I know still approach me for advice. I want to share with you the story of a guy who approached me because he was struggling with anxiety. For confidentiality reasons, I'm going to change his name and a few details, but the basics of the story are true. Joe told me that he'd been struggling with extreme anxiety for some years, and the doctor had told him that he had high-functioning anxiety. Now, high-functioning anxiety is not actually an official diagnosis. So I asked him what sort of things he worried about. It was quite a wide range of things like money, his job, his family, which fitted quite well with generalised anxiety disorder. But he also worried a lot about what people thought of him, suggesting there was also some level of social anxiety. Unfortunately, Joe was very reluctant to see a therapist, because he worried that if people found out, they would judge him as weak and ridiculous, which of course was part of the social anxiety element that I mentioned. We had very limited time to talk, and Joe asked me what one piece of advice I could give him that could help his anxiety. I thought about it for a moment, and then said, do the opposite of what your anxiety is telling you to do. So I'm going to explain why I said this, and tell you a bit more of Joe's story to show how this advice can help. Anxiety is caused by the part of the brain that is designed to protect us from danger becoming overactive or hypersensitive. And while we want our brain to look out for danger when we're doing something like crossing the road, we don't want it warning us of dangers that are not real or are exaggerated. Joe told me that he was anxious because his boss had advised him to apply for a higher level job. Joe worked in the aerospace industry and thought that all his colleagues were very clever, but he felt that he wasn't. He thought that he would not be good enough for the job. His boss, suggesting he should apply, clearly suggested that he was good enough to do the job. And he realised it was just his anxiety telling him that he wasn't. So using my advice to do the opposite of what his anxiety was telling him to do, he decided to apply for the job. But he said he was not going to tell anyone that he had applied for the job, because his anxiety was still telling him everyone would think it was ridiculous and laugh at him. When I asked him why people would laugh at him, he said, well, people do, don't they? This use of the term people is a sign of a generalisation. In CBT, generalisations are what we call a thinking error. If we've had a negative experience in life, such as people laughing at us, our overactive anxious brain starts to generalise and apply this past negative experience to our future experiences, even though the circumstances could be completely different. So I reminded him of the principle of doing the opposite of what his anxiety was telling him. And he decided he would tell people that he had applied. A few weeks later, I bumped into him again and asked how things were going. He was still anxious because the interview was approaching, but I was pleased to hear that he'd embraced my advice. Not only had he told his close friends, he had told everyone that he had applied for the job. And to his surprise, everyone was really pleased for him and offered him words of encouragement and support. So his anxious brain's belief that they would all laugh at him had been proven wrong. I next came across Joe about a year later and asked him about the job. He had got the job, which had lessened some of his financial worries. When I asked him about his anxiety generally, he said it was a lot better. He said, I've been doing what you advised. I've been doing the opposite of what my anxiety tells me, and it has really helped. Now, I should point out that this doesn't mean Joe's anxiety is cured. And overcoming anxiety isn't as simple as just using this one piece of advice. But doing the opposite of what your anxiety tells you is an important principle to learn and apply if you want to overcome anxiety. But it's not easy, and there are risks with this approach. If you try to do some really big things that your anxious brain is just not ready for, you might find the anxiety overwhelming. So my other piece of advice is to learn how to use this principle in a safe and controlled way by seeing a therapist trained in CBT. They will teach you how to gradually retrain your anxious brain using tools like graded exposure, thought-challenging exercises, and behavioural experiments. If you can't afford or access therapy, you can learn how to use these CBT tools and principles in my playlists. There is one for each anxiety disorder. Take care now.